Okay, shalom everybody. My name is Ari Shvat, and I don't know how many of you have learned with me in the past, but I have the privilege of being the editor of the most recent books of Rav Kook and the director of the Rav Kook archives. And I teach in a lot of different midrashot, mostly one-year programs in adult education. And what we're going to do today in honor of Pesach is a very interesting sugya in Masechet Pesachim, where we're going to see that there's actually one word in the Gemara, which everybody agrees what the word means, but we will see five totally different understandings in the Rishonim of how to explain that word. And as we'll see, as the heading is, it's related to stealing the Afikoman. And we will see that there are five educational approaches how to keep children from leaving the Pesach Seder. In other words, how to keep them interested. And as we're going to see, these are general hadrachot, general directions. Each Rishon is going to see in this term how to keep our children interested not only in the Seder, but in Torah and mitzvot in Judaism bichlal. A closed captioning transcript is being generated. Okay. And the Gemara, we'll start with Masechet Pesachim, Kuftet Amud Aleph. Amru Halav Rabbi Akiva. It said about Rabbi Akiva, Shaya mechalek klayot ve'eglozim letinokot be'erev Pesach, that he would distribute on Erev Pesach at the night of the Seder. He would give out klayot. Today in Hebrew, that's called pitzuchim. Obviously, they used to eat kitniot, right? Sunflower seeds and different things which were roasted, and egozim, nuts. And Rabbi Akiva used to give them out be'erev Pesach k'nei shelo yishnu v'yishalu, so that the children should be interested and they shouldn't fall asleep and they should ask. And there are different girsaot here. Some say that they should not, just not they shouldn't fall asleep, or just that they should ask. But then Tanya Rebbe Eliezer Omer, we find a Braita where Rebbe Eliezer, who is the Rebbe of Rebbe Akiva, so apparently it's a similar idea. Chotfin matzot b'leilei Pesachim. We grab the matzot on the night of Pesach at the Seder, bishvil tinokot shelo yishnu, so that the children don't fall asleep. Now, just from the context, we see that Rabbi Akiva says that we should keep them interested by giving out things which are fun, that they'll enjoy. And in this context, Rabbi Eliezer says, we grab the matzot so that the children shouldn't fall asleep. Now, I like giving this as an example of a classic machloket rishonim, of how each one of the rishonim, those are the rabbis with about the year 1000 to 1500, as we'll see, it's Rashi, Rambam, Rashbam, etc., where this is a famous Rorschach inkblot, where everybody sees the same inkblot, but everybody sees something different. And you could turn it upside down. And I've had students tell me that it looks like a wolf, or it looks like bats. But the most interesting reaction that I ever got was from a student in one of the midrashot where I teach that said that it looks like two parents fighting over a child. Now, interestingly enough, her parents had undergone a difficult divorce not too long before the school year. And that's why I bring that example, because a person sees that which he has going on in his mind. Accordingly, what we're going to see now in the Rambam, when the Rambam says we grab the matzot at the Seder so that the children shouldn't fall asleep. Now, everybody agrees what the goal is, to keep the children interested, that they shouldn't fall asleep. Everybody agrees that we're grabbing matzot. Even the word grabbing, everyone agrees what is grabbing. The word grabbing. But the question is, who grabs what from whom? And that we're going to see each one of the Rishonim, that's what I want to suggest, sees in this very simple term his ani ma'amin, his gestalt, his Jewish educational theme of how to keep children interested in Torah or in the Seder or in whatever. So the most famous explanation is that of the Rambam, Hilchot Chametz Umatzah, source number 2 here. V'tzarich la'asot shinui b'layla hazeh. We have to do things differently on this night. Kedei sheyiru habanim v'yishalu, so that the children should see, v'yomru, ma nishtana halayla hazeh mikol haleilot. In other words, do things different. I always remember my firstborn. Everybody remembers their firstborn when my oldest son Netanel was like 4. And it was the first time that I realized, hey, I can fulfill the mitzvah from the Torah of telling the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim on Pesach to my child. I finally have a child who's old enough. So a good technical idea, we heard that a couple days beforehand, you put the child to sleep in the afternoon, and then he stays up at night, and that is his new biological clock, and that way he is up. And when I came home from yeshiva, I gave my son, Netanel, a piece of chocolate. Now, usually for the first children, you try and be very health conscious. That in our house, we only eat according to what is healthy. So we never gave him chocolate, but he knew what chocolate was from his grandparents. And he was a little suspicious. So he looks at me, he looks at my wife, he looks back at me, and he just says, what bracha do I make on this? So I said, you say a sha'akol. So he quickly makes a sha'akol and he eats. And then I give him another square of chocolate. And now he's a little suspicious. And he looks at me, he looks at my wife, looks back at me, and then he eats it. And then I gave him a third square of chocolate. And this time, children, Baruch Hashem, are naturally curious. My son says to me, Abba, mata pitom noten li chocolate. Right? That's a modern Hebrew Sabra's way of saying, why is tonight different from all other nights? Why are you all of a sudden giving me chocolate? You never give me chocolate. So that's what I was waiting for him. That is the real manishtana. And everybody agrees that the best manishtana is to do things that are a little different so that the child will ask, hey, why are we doing things different tonight? And then you grab the opportunity and tell, well, tonight on this date, 3,336 years ago, 37, Hashem took us out of Egypt and tell him the story. Okay, so that is the idea. Rather than proclaiming and saying by heart the manishtana, that you really should do things that will get him to really ask, ma pitom. Okay, so the Rambam continues, Ad sheyashiv lehem v'yomar lehem, right? This is your cue to answer why is tonight different? Because on this night, God took us out of Egypt, etc., etc. V'ketzad mishaneh, here we're going to get into our Gemara. And how do you do things differently? Michalek lehem klayot ve'egozim. The Mara Michalva says things lismoach, things to make the child happy. Ve'okrim hashulchan milifneim kodem sheyochlu, and you take away the table, and the kid says, "Hey, why are you taking away the table? We haven't eaten yet." V'chotfin matzah ze miyad ze. Now it's very clear from here, this is the oldest mention of what we know and what most Edot, most communities have the custom of stealing the Afikoman from each other. And here we see in the context, what is the goal of the Rambam? How does he understand? Grab the matzot so that the children don't fall asleep. Make the Seder fun. And this is the concept of giving positive reinforcement, of giving prizes for whoever who asks a good question, whoever gives a good answer. And in fact, this is the point number 1 in child education that Freud writes that, just like most things in his theories, he says it goes back to your childhood. And what is going to decide whether a child is going to be religious or not is, does he have a positive or negative association with religion? If he has a positive association, even in his subconscious, so he will continue in that direction. But if all he has is negative relations, I'll give you an example. The worst Shabbat that I ever spent in my life. My parents almost never went away for a Shabbat, but one Shabbat, I don't know if it was an anniversary or something. I must have been like 9 or 10, and my brother Ezra was a year older, so 10 or 11. And they sent us off to family friends. And this family, they had also a couple of boys our age. And we thought we'd have a great Shabbat. And then in the middle of the meal on Friday night, the father of the family starts yelling at his wife. Now, that's really not politically correct. And as a little 9-year-old, I didn't know how to digest that. I usually, hosts don't yell at their wives. And then he yelled at his son. And then he yelled at one of his other sons. And then he had a third son. Then he yells at my brother. And then he yells at me. And I had never seen him like this. And finally, after all of this terror was going on, he finally got up and went to the bathroom. And his wife apologized and says, I apologize. You've never seen my husband this way, but you have to understand he is a chain smoker. He's addicted to cigarettes. And on Shabbat, where he can't smoke, he's very edgy. The end of the story, not only was it the worst Shabbat of my life, but the end of the story is all of his children are not Shomrei Shabbat. They don't observe Shabbat because Shabbat was the worst day of the week for them. Now, this sounds like a an extreme case, but everyone can look at their own families and think about what Friday afternoon, the last hour or two before Shabbat, that Shabbat rush, what it looks like, where everyone's yelling, "Who's setting the table? Who's taking the garbage? Did you share the toilet paper yet? Did you get the muktzah out?" And everyone's yelling at everyone, and that does not leave a positive association with Shabbat. And the solution to this very common problem is simply don't wait for the last 2 hours before you start preparing. Have the Shabbat rush begin Thursday night or Wednesday night or Tuesday night or however early you need it, but make sure that Shabbat only has positive associations. I'll give you another example. I was on Shlichut and I taught in a Sunday school, and I tried making Judaism as enjoyable and as positive as possible, positive associations. And towards the end of the year, one of the boys comes up to me and says, there were 12-year-olds preparing for their bar mitzvah. So he says to me, "Rabbi, I don't think I want to be Jewish when I get older." So I didn't want to burst his bubble and tell him he has no choice. You're in, and there's no way out of being Jewish. But he probably meant, I don't want to be religious. So I asked him, why not? And he says, well, you're teaching us a lot about the holidays. What are all the Jewish holidays? It's all about they killed us. They tried to kill us. They did kill us. They were not successful in killing us. So if everybody wants to kill the Jews, why should I want to be Jewish? And this is a problem now at this time of year, Pesach cleaning. So many kids have a negative association with Pesach because they don't clean, they don't work that much during the year. And then all of a sudden they're overloaded. That is going to leave a negative association with Pesach. So what do? Either teach them how to work all year round. That's a good idea. Or spend more money to get more help. But one thing for sure, if you turn your child into the Korban Pesach, into the Paschal sacrifice, he is not going to want to observe Pesach when he's older. And this is something I actually brought down for you in verse number 12. Rav Moshe Feinstein, this I actually heard from Rav Moshe Feinstein's students. I don't speak Yiddish, but I remember hearing in my grandparents' generation that there was a term, Oy is schwer zu sein a Yid. Maybe somebody here speaks Yiddish. Oy is schwer zu sein a Yid. Something along the lines, it's hard to be a Jew. And I remember the older people, I don't speak Yiddish, but I remember them saying it a lot. Apparently, I asked somebody, what does that mean? And Rav Moshe Feinstein says that this is what killed American Jewry, because that first generation, where there still were a lot of families who observed Shabbat, they did it with a kvetch. And yeah, they woke up early and they went to davening, but they kept saying it's hard to be Jew. It's hard to be a Jew. It's hard to be Jewish. Now, their kids aren't stupid. So if the parents are always transmitting that it's hard to be a Jew or that it's not fun to be a Jew, so that's a reason why today 91% of the Jews in North America are not observant. And Rav Moshe Feinstein says, and that's really what the Rambam is saying here, getting back to the Rambam, this is why it's so important to, and that's what Freud says, the Rambam goes in the direction, what does it mean, grab the matzot so that we don't lose our children? Grab the matzot and turn it into a game. Hiding the Afikoman, it doesn't make a difference whether the father hides, the mother hides, the children hide, prizes, but the idea of making it having positive associations. Okay, so that's pretty clear and pretty clear cut. Let's go look at the Meiri in source number 5, who sees it a little different. Source number 4, the Nimukei Yosef. There, all of what we're going to see today is on that term, potfin et matzot. We grab the matzot so that the kids don't fall asleep. He says, source number 4, derech schok v'chibuv mitzvah. Here he adds a new point. The idea of grabbing the matzot is not just a fun game, because it's important that kids have a fun, a positive association with that. You know what? Before we go on to the Meiri, I should mention another point. We mentioned Freud. Erikson mentions another aspect that is connected with this Rambam. It says that it's not just whether a child is going to observe mitzvot or not when he's older, is not just whether he has a positive association with the mitzvot, but does he have a positive association with his parents? And what Erikson says is that the baseline, the base for comparison for every boy is his father, for every girl, it's her mother. And part of the maturing process is during adolescence, a child decides, do I want to be like my father? Or do I want to be more or less on any given topic? Now, Erikson continues and he says that if a child has a positive association with his parent or her parent, so then on the important issues, they will be on that baseline. So if the parent is Orthodox, the child will want to be Orthodox or will have a positive aspect. Why? Because just like we want them to have a positive aspect association with mitzvot, the parent is an association with tradition. And if the child associates positively and identifies with the parent, so on the important base ideas, he will be like the parent. On other issues, that's where he will express his individualism, that I have a different haircut, or I have a different sense of humor, or I enjoy different types of music, or I'm more of this or less than this. And that every person wants to be a little different than their parents. But if you have a positive association, identification with your parents, Erikson says that is what's going to decide for if a child is going to be observant. Maybe I'll just add a third point, a lot of psychology today. Adler says that everything gets back to recognition and attention. And if a person wants to, every person needs attention. And everybody wants a positive attention. But if we don't get positive attention, it's better to have neutral attention or even negative attention. And that is why it is not uncommon, especially Baruch Hashem in Orthodox families where you have a lot of children. If you have 5, 7, 9 children, a lot of times children will feel that they're not getting enough. In Hebrew, it's called tsumi, tsomet lev, attention. And I mention that because just looking at some of the faces here, a lot of the people are past the age of parenting, but by the age of grandparenting. And this is very important where grandparents can come in because parents, as we know, just look at your children, your married children as they're preparing for Pesach. They don't have too much time. But if you have a little more time and invite, one out last what my wife did, invite the grandchildren over, even to help clean for Pesach. But you invite one over and you give them ice cream and you give them positive attention. That is part of the attention which is very often lacking in families which have a lot of children. And one of the easiest way, and working with 18-year-olds for 35 years now, um, I could tell you from experience, the vast majority of kids who leave religion is not because of questions they have on philosophy or on God or anything like that. It starts out with a something conscious and sometimes unconscious way of wanting to get attention from your parents. And the easiest way of getting attention from your parents, if they're religious, is by turning on lights on Shabbat or smoking, bichlal, or smoking on Shabbat, or dyeing your hair green. I had a student who dyed her hair green. Now, it's very clear that she was touting for attention. And these are 3 points, and the common denominator is that if we want our children to follow in our direction of Torah observance, and we don't want to lose them, not from the Seder table or from the Torah table, the way of doing it is having a positive association. That's what the Rambam says. Steal the Afikoman, have prizes, make it fun. Again, Erickson adds positive association, not with the mitzvot, but also with the parents. And Adler adds, make sure that they're getting enough attention. Okay, and let us now go on to the Meiri. The Nimukei Yosef, sorry, we started with the Nimukei Yosef, which is source number 4. He adds on something else. He says, what does it mean? Grab the matzot so that the children don't fall asleep at the Seder. Grab the matzot derech schok to make it fun. That's like the Rambam. But then he adds v'chibuv mitzvah to show a genuine excitement for the mitzvot. I love this matzot. I want the matzot. Now the Meiri also goes in this direction. And he says again, what does it mean to grab the matzot so the children don't fall asleep? We show that we yearn for the matzot. I want matzot. I love matzot. I want to do the mitzvah. Give me the matzah. No, give me the matzah. And the Meiri in Masechet Kiddushin on the same Gemara adds derech gargaranut, which is today gargaranut has a negative connotations, but it's sort of like pigging out on the matzah. I want matzah. And this is a little different than the Rambam, where the Meiri is stressing not just that the mitzvot should be fun, that the Seder should be fun, that the matzot should be fun, but we should show our children from a young age that we have genuine excitement when it comes to the matzah or the mitzvot in general, because there's a French psychologist named David Papineau who says that what is going to decide whether a child is going to be religious or bichlal, what his priorities are going to be, that childhood, in his opinion, is constantly shuffling and reshuffling our priorities based on what we see is really important. In other words, it's not what you say is important. You could say learning Torah is important. You could say the Seder is important. But only if you get excited about it, genuine excitement, that shows the children your real priorities. And classic example, certain things are mamash embedded in your memory. I remember the first baseball game that I ever went to. It was in third grade, and we had moved to New York. And there was a local rabbi who had a clergy pass. And the New York Yankees let the rabbis and priests bring 3, 4 boys from their shul, from their parish, Lahavdil, as a public service to the Yankee games. It was a Sunday afternoon, and they were playing the Boston Red Sox. And anybody knows baseball knows that there's a big rivalry between the Red Sox and the Yankees. And the I just remember at the peak of the game, it must have been at the ninth inning, and it was a close game. And I guess Boston was coming up to bat because everyone was yelling, "Boo! Boo!" And I was sitting next to the rabbi of our shul, and he was getting red in the face, and he was yelling together with 70,000 other people, "Boo! Boo!" And I remember thinking to myself, wow, I didn't realize baseball was so important. And I'd never seen this rabbi get so excited about Shabbat or about anything. And I remember as a third grader thinking, reshuffling what Papanyu says, reshuffling my priorities based on what the Meiri says, genuine excitement. Now, thank God that's not the end of the story. The end of the story is that Simchat Torah, the following Simchat Torah, everybody knows, even the women, if you ever look at the men and they dance, men don't really dance at Simchat Torah. They do what's called the yeshiva shuffle. You know that one, you put your hand on the guy in front of you on his shoulder and you just shuffle like a dancing bear or something. And I will never forget where, I was dancing and some in the circle and somebody left the circle. And then I was behind the rabbi, the same rabbi who took us to the baseball game. And I had never felt such a wet, perspired filled shirt. And he was turning not red, he was purple. I remember him getting up on the chair and yelling, Ha'aderet v'amuna. And I remember reshuffling my priorities because I thought that he was excited about baseball, and he was, but he's even more excited about Simchat Torah. And the fact is that today I am talking 55 years later, and I still remember the perspiration and the color of the rabbi's face and what he really is genuinely excited about. Now, very often we tell children what they should be, what are priorities, but during our spare time, how do I spend my spare time? If I spend it learning or doing mitzvot or volunteering, my child catches that. There's a famous term that mitzvot are not caught, they are caught. Kids have antennas and they catch what is really important. And it doesn't make a difference what you say. If during your spare time you spend all your time shopping on the internet or surfing the web or checking your messages or whatever, then that's what your children are probably going to realize is really what's important. Now, if you want them to have more idealistic um, priorities, you have to make a conscious, genuine effort already from a young age to show them what really you really get excited about. I remember I once was at Shabbat, a family relative, and one of the kids knocked over a piece of china, and the mother started yelling, "Oh, that was my grandmother's china! What are you clumsy klutz? And go to your room!" And she was really disturbed by her china. And it's very clear that that is what the kids are going to continue. That is the direction that you could say that religion is important, but if you don't get excited about it, but you do get excited about your china, then that is what is going to be important to your kids. By the way, also within mitzvot, I'm sure most people here know this scenario that a child on Shabbat, by accident, turns off the light in the bathroom, and everyone jumps, Shabbos! And then he turns on the light. And we all know that scenario, but has anybody, I've never seen anybody jump when a child speaks Lashon Hara. We also know that Lashon Hara is very serious, very important mitzvah. But if you don't jump, I'm not saying you should jump or not jump. If you're a jumper and you jump about China, then you should also jump about Shabbat. You should also jump about Lashon Hara. One of the reasons why Lashon Hara is on the bottom of the priority list is because children do not see their parents. If their parents can't see them or hear them speaking Lashon Hara, they'll say, if they notice, they'll say something like, That's not nice. We don't speak bad about other people, but they don't jump. They don't yell. And again, I'm not saying you should jump or yell about anything, but if you jump and yell about anything, then that is going to reshuffle your child's priorities. And whether it be Shabbat, whether it be Lashon Hara, whether it be, I give another example. Some of you, if you may be in Israel, may be familiar. There is a Rabbi Jacobson. He's in the Haredi community, and he apparently has learned psychology. And he tells the story of a child from a cheder in Yerushalayim who was kicked out of the cheder. And anybody who knows the Haredi world knows that if a child is kicked out of the yeshiva, is not just a problem for them, is a problem that their sisters or brothers might have problems getting good shidduchim, getting good matches. So the family was very upset, and they called the rabbi, and the rabbi called Rabbi Yaakovson, and he comes and he calls the child and he says, "Tell me, what happened? Why were you kicked out of the yeshiva?" So the little boy says, my Rebbe says I was chutzpahdik. And Rabbi Yaakovson says to him, "And you tell me your side of the story?" He says, "No, I'm not chutzpahdik." So he asks him, "So tell me what happened." So the child said that the Rebbe was giving him a shiur about the importance of chesed. And one of the ways of showing the importance of chesed is the Rebbe said, so kinderlach, if anybody wants to know, is there anything even more important than an Dvar Torah? What would it be? And he wanted the kids to say chesed. And this kid yelled out, Tulint. And the whole class laughed, and he was thrown out of cheder. So Rav Yaakovson knows to ask their child, what did you mean when you said that Shulint is more important than Dvar Torah? And the child says, I heard this from Rav Yaakovson, says very matter-of-factly, he says, well, in our family, we're three boys, and I'm the second boy, and it's my turn every Shabbat to say Dvar Torah at the second meal, and I always prepare Dvar Torah on the Parsha, and my father, he sits there eating his chulent. He doesn't really listen to what I is saying, but at the end he says, Yasher Koach, I'm proud of you. But if you ask what is more important than a Dvar Torah, the answer is chulent. So the kid was just telling his reshuffling of priorities. Anyway, so that is point number 2, and that's what's called, I know in the youth movements in Bnei Akiva, this was always called the dugma ishi, that the best way of educating is through practical example. Now, this concept is also found, before we move on to point number 3, we're going to start putting on the gas because we're running out of time. Let's look together in source number 7, where the Alshich says something very interesting. By the way, the Alshich has an interesting name, Torah Moshe, but nobody calls it Torah Moshe because that sounds like a too bombastic name for a sefer. So everybody calls it the Alshich. The Alshich writes as follows. He says this on the Kriyat Shema. Kakdamazu, when we look at the introduction, To'il gam lelimud b'nechem. If we're interested in educating our children, this introduction is very important. What's he talking about? All right, we say that you have to put the words of the Torah on your heart and on your soul. And if you don't, lo yidabek bam limudchem, then your learning and your education of your children is not going to be successful. But if you do observe the Torah's directive, that put the words of the Torah really on your heart, that's what excites you. What's the continuation? שכל כך ייכנס הלימוד בליבם ונפשם, עד גדר שגם יימשכו מאליהם לדבר הם בם, בשבתך בביתך, מבלי תתחיל אתה. They will even be better than you, because they, again, shuffling priorities. And that's the Nimukei Yosef and the Meiri. saying that if you want your kids to be excited about the Seder, you have to be genuinely excited about the Seder. If you want them to be genuinely excited about Torah mitzvot, you have to be. Because all of life, they are shuffling and reshuffling what really excites the parents and the educators. Now, this is something also, just to finish this point, that we say every day in Uvalat Zion, right before Aleinu L'Shabeach and Nusach Ashkenaz at the end of the morning prayers. We say, we ask, we pray to Hashem, Ulovdo B'levav Shalem, that we should serve Hashem wholeheartedly, Lima'an, so that Lo nigal larik v'lo nidlel lebehala, so that our children will also follow our Torah u'mitzvot. By the way, if there is anybody here who davens Nusach Sfarad, some of the Sfaradim have here in parentheses to have in mind to succeed in your child's education, to teach them a love for Torah mitzvot, which is going to be based on, am I genuinely excited about Torah mitzvot? Okay, so those are the first 2 points. Again, we saw, what does the Gemara mean? Chotfin et matzot. Grab the matzot to keep the children from falling asleep at the Seder, and from Judaism in general. Number 1, make it fun, positive association. That's the Rambam. Number 2, the Nimuke Yosef and the Meiri say it has to be genuine excitement, because that's what kids catch. Explanation number 3 is a totally different explanation. Let's look in source number, the Rashbam, source number 9. And you'll see why I am aligning them in the order that I am doing so. And I'll already show that, as opposed to now what we've seen, the stress on the positive, that the mitzvot and the Seder and the matzah should be fun and should be exciting, genuine excitement. The Rashbam adds, he says, in my opinion, what does it mean, grab the matzot, so that you don't lose your children at the Seder? Grab the matzot, misalkin et halechem miyad hatinokot. Grab the matzah, grab the food away from the children if they start eating during the Seder. Shelo yeshenim mitoch ma'achal harbeh, so that they won't fall asleep because of being satiated. We just mentioned 2 minutes ago, the Chulin syndrome. Everybody who's ever given shiurim knows that the worst time to give a shiur on Shabbat is after Chulent, because after the Chulent, we're all tired and half the people are going to be falling asleep, even if they don't want to. And what the Rashbam is saying is that if you don't want to lose the children at the Seder, you have to say, no, now is not the time to eat, or now is not the time to play. And this is the other side of the coin, which anybody who has been around the world for more than 20, 25 years has seen how the world has shifted in child education from more discipline to less discipline. And it's black and white, and I'm not saying that it's good or bad, but you should know that children who do not have discipline, and they just parents let them go towards anarchy, doing whatever they feel like. I, growing up in the 60s, had kids in my class who, you remember this? Children who didn't have a bedtime, children who didn't have to do their homework, and some parents did make them go to school, and, just do whatever the heck you want to. And some of you may remember that from the 60s and the early 70s, do your own thing. And that lack of discipline was not good for the children. There was Eric Fromm, who was a father, the guru of freedom for children, eventually wrote a book called Escape from Freedom. What is escape from freedom? That he basically says, I was talking about educating children to be free, but that's not anarchy. If you raise your children on anarchy with no frameworks, no red lines, no disciplining, no saying no, then the child is not going to get very far. Now, if this was true in the 60s and 70s, how much more so today, where anybody who deals with high school children knows by the boys in the yeshiva high school that the biggest challenge today is pornography. And even if you don't want to get there through the internet, you get there. And once a child has been exposed to pornography, it is very difficult to get him back to doing other things. And sometimes a parent just has to say, and that's what the Rashbam is saying at the Seder. Um, sometimes during Shabbos, at the meal, the kids go and play, and the adults sit and talk divrei Torah or talk about politics or whatever they talk about, Israel's big topic, and the children go and play. But that is not good for the Seder. Harry, the children are supposed to be the heroes of the Seder. And if so, if a child goes and plays, or if a child says, I'm hungry, I want to eat, there is a time to say, no, now is not the time for eating. Now is not the time for playing. We are going to tell the story about Yetziat Mitzrayim. Now, as we're going to see in a minute, you can't overdo that either. Just like with everything, the balance is very important. But I should mention, I remember growing up, anybody remember the marshmallow experiment of Stanford University? Yeah, some of you remember it. Well, the most important part of the experiment was not done when we were kids in the 60s, but it was in the follow-up in the 90s. That in the 1960s, just a shortened version. By the way, you could see this on YouTube. It's very interesting in black and white from the 1960s. They tell kids the first question they ask them is, do you want a lollipop, a pretzel, or a marshmallow? And most of the children chose a marshmallow. That's why it's called the marshmallow experiment. And then the adult brought a marshmallow, put it on a plate, and the child was told, if you can contain yourself, you can eat the marshmallow whenever you want, but if you can hold on, have the self restraint, and I come back in 10 minutes and the marshmallow is still there, I will give you a second marshmallow and you will gain, and you'll have two marshmallows. And they have a hidden camera and they show the kids, and that's why it's funny to see on YouTube how kids try and deal with the challenge. And if I remember the numbers correctly, 40% just ate the marshmallow right away. We're talking about 5, 6 year olds. And another 30% were able to withstand 3, 4 minutes. And then they ate the marshmallow. They just couldn't withstand. And the last 30%, they contain themselves. Some of them hide their eyes. Some of them hide the marshmallow. Some of them hide under the table, but they, in the end, get that second marshmallow. Now, the most important part of the experiment, and this is less known, is that in the 1990s, they followed up these children, and they're now in their mid-30s, and they found that on anything measurable, that 30% who already knew the key to success is self-discipline, self-containment, go for the long-term pleasure rather than the short-term pleasure, they were disproportionately a lot more successful socially, economically, professionally, in everything that you can measure. And this is what I tell my students, a very, very important point of the Torah. The Gemara in Chulin says that every pleasure the Torah allows. Just sometimes you have to wait 6 hours. Catch that? In other words, there is a time and a place for every pleasure. The Torah doesn't want to say no. And it even goes one by one through different pleasures. And the Torah shows you how you can have this pleasure and have that pleasure too. But the bottom line is the Torah teaches us that self-discipline. And that is to teach our children, especially on Pesach, the holiday of freedom, that what we want is freedom, not liberty. Freedom, not anarchy. And the Rashbam draws that by saying, again, how do you want to keep your kids at the Seder table? Well, if they grab the food and they want to start eating, grab it away and say, no, this is not the time for eating or playing or whatever. Now, that being said, obviously, as I already foreshadowed to drop, everything has to be in balance because we're not now going to show the other side of the coin. The other side of the coin is the Ravad, the Ravid, as he's called in yeshivas. That is source number 3. And this Ravid is on the Rambam. And again, what is the term in the Gemara? The term in the Gemara says we grab the matzot so the children shouldn't fall asleep. What does the Rashbam say? Grab the matzot. We saw the Rashbam says grab the matzot away from the children. Don't let them eat, because if they eat, they'll fall asleep. But the Ravid says grab the matzot mimaharin le'echol kedei shelo yishnu. Almost the opposite of the Rashbam. Grab the matzot, explains the Ravid, hurry up to motzi, matzah, maror, korech, shulchan oreh. Get to the knedlach, get to the good food, get to the Afikoman, get to the fun stuff. Don't drag out Magid too much. Because if you drag out Magid too much, you're going to lose the child. So what do? Grab the matzot, grab motzi, matzah, maror, korech. Don't, the obvious question, don't we say in the Haggadah, "V'cholam marbel l'saper sipur b'tziat Mitzrayim areze mishubach," that the more you tell in Magid, the more you tell about Yetziat Mitzrayim, the better it is. The Netziv explains that is after the small children have gone to sleep. The Seder Magid should be relatively short, because you got to cater to the needs of the children. The smaller children, they are the heroes. We are giving over the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim, of the Exodus from Egypt, to the children. They're the heroes. So yeah, it's a challenge, because your 18-year-old has just come home from yeshiva and has a lot of divrei Torah. And your 30-year-old is dealing with their 1-year-old child who's crying or wet or whatever. And your 5-year-old just keeps saying, I'm hungry, I'm hungry. And your 10-year-old is saying, I'm bored, I'm bored. And we all know this scenario. And Baruch Hashem, we have different extended families and they come to the center. But that's what the Ravid is stressing here. What should be your chronological program? And this is the point, that the first part of the Seder Magid, you should cater to the children and go at the pace that's good for them. Grab the matzot so that we don't lose the children, so that the children don't fall asleep. And then you want to say your divrei Torah, you want to hear your 18-year-old and your 25-year-old and your 30-year-old who's already put their children to sleep, etc., etc., and the younger ones are asleep or they're playing with their cousins. After the Afikoman, or after Chad Gadya, and by the way, that's the pshat, the Netziv says it on those rabbis who were meeting in Bnei Brak, because some of them were of the opinion that you're only yotza, you have to eat the Korban Pesach, the Paschal Lamb, until midnight. Now, midnight is about 1:45 in the morning. And if you have to eat the Paschal Lamb by that time, you should have to eat the Afikoman by that time. And the mitzvah of telling Yetziat Mitzrayim is until that time. So why were they spending the whole night until the morning? All night they were talking about Yetziat Mitzrayim. The Netziv says, excuse me, that's the point. Again, this is the fourth explanation, that how do you keep your children at the Seder table? By having, I call this, realistic expectations. Yes, the Rashbam says you need to discipline and sometimes say no, but don't over-discipline. You got to find the right balance, especially in the modern world where 353 days in the Jewish year, a lot of times we let the kids do almost everything that they want. And people today are not so much into disciplining their children. And then all of a sudden at Seder night, you're going to say no, and you have to be at the Seder table. Well, that's not going to work. And that, getting back to Freud and the Rambam, that's going to leave negative associations with the Seder and with Judaism, right? So you got to find the proper balance. There's a famous story about the Chatam Sofer. The Chatam Sofer, one of the great heavyweight Achronim, he was a rabbi in Pressburg in Hungary. And there's a father of a local 10-year-old. He had a lot of nachas from his children. And he had a 10-year-old son who already knew Seder Nezikin by heart. And he brings him to the Chatam Sofer, bragging. He says, "You want to hear my 10-year-old? He knows Seder Nezikin, all the Mishnahs by heart. Just start anyone, and he'll be able to finish it by heart." Chatam Sofer wasn't impressed. He says, "No, no." So the father thought Chatam Sofer doesn't believe him. He says, "No, try him out. Start any Mishnah." Chatam Sofer takes the father to the side and says, "Listen, how old did you say the child was? If you don't let him play at the age of 10, he's going to play at the age of 20. And I know personally a story like this where parents, and this is especially with the firstborn, we all have high expectations of our children, and you want them to be the biggest Talmid Chacham, and you want them to be the biggest tzaddik and the Mashiach, and everybody has high expectations. But if you don't have realistic expectations, you're going to drive the kid crazy, and he's just going to rebel. And that is what the Ravid is saying. Just another example. Also, we're now during Pesach, during the cleaning season. The Everybody knows that it's pleasant in again, positive associations, Freud, the Rambam. When you're cleaning for Pesach, put on some nice, relaxed music in the background. Good idea. Problem is that teenagers very often do not like the music, the relaxed music that you like. And one time I remember way, way back, we had a kid, one of our children was into Sinai Tor. If anybody heard of him, he is like started this alternative music, which is a lot of yelling. Now it's religious yelling, he says, Bali Litz, I want to yell out to God. Yeah, I love you, God. I want to cleave to God. And it's pretty positive, but he just yells a lot. And my wife couldn't stand all the yelling. And she just turned the channel again. And we discussed it afterwards. And I said, you like Avram Fried or Mordechai ben David, but the odds of your child enjoying the same music that we listened to 20 years ago are pretty small. And that at least, he's listening to Jewish music, religious music, might be a little different than that which you like, but you got to have realistic expectations. And just like our kids are not in our days, remember everybody wanted their child to be doctors and lawyers, and you got to be realistic and don't overshoot your children. That, by the way, is part of the nice part of the educational system in Israel, where when we were looking for yeshiva high schools for our kids, we had our choice of literally hundreds of different ulpanot or yeshivot tichoniot to choose from. And I'm proud to say that of our 7 children, they went to 6 different yeshiva high schools. And that means that each one found something which is suitable. Chanoch lina'ar al pi darko, right? You should educate a child according to where he's at, not where you would want him to be at. And now we're up to the 5th explanation, getting back to the share screen. And this is Rashi. Rashi explains, and this is source number 11. Again, we'll do a quick review. What were the first 4 explanations of chotfin matzot? Grab the matzot so that the children won't fall asleep from the Seder, parenthetically, and that we also could not lose them from Torah mitzvot in general. Number 1, the Rambam says grab the matzot means make it fun. Positive associations. Freud. Erickson. Answer number 2, the Nimukei Yosef, says that grab the matzot means show genuine excitement, because children are constantly shuffling and reshuffling their priorities, and that's what's going to decide. Explanation number 3, the Rashbam says, grab the matzot away from the children who are beginning to eat, because if you let them eat, they're going to fall asleep and they're going to miss the Seder. Number 4 was the Ravid, who says, grab the matzot, and that is to hurry up. Motzi matzah, grab the matzah. Hurry up, Magid, to get to the matzah so that we don't lose the children and don't drag it out. Don't have unrealistic expectations of a 5-year-old, of a 10-year-old. The final explanation is that of Rashi. Usually we start with Rashi, but because this is mostly technical, I left it for last because it doesn't take a long time. Source 11. Rashi says, what does it mean? Grab the matzot so that we don't lose the children, so the children don't fall asleep. Grab the matzot, magbihin et akara. Pick up the matzah, pick up the Seder plate, bishvil tinokot yishalu, so that the children should ask, why are you picking up the Seder plate? And the idea of Rashi here is what we call in modern education giruyim. In English, how do you say that? Ligarot is, how do you say that in English? Stimulation. Stimulate the child. It could be visual stimulation. It could be intellectual stimulation. Like Rabbi Yisrael Salanter said about Reb Chaim Soloveitchik, he said that the brisker way of learning is going to save Gemara in the modern world because it's intellectually stimulating. It could be emotionally stimulating. Hell, stories. And this is very important about Jewish education, for sure, at Leil HaSeder. And that, just like modern education knows how to make things stimulating, so too, we have to make sure the Jewish education is stimulating and that the Seder, Pesach, should be stimulating. Again, stimulate them to ask questions, to give answers, educational stimulation, visual stimulation, that's grab the matzot, emotional stimulation. And with these 5 approaches, I'll just add 2 last points. Number one, very important, a big advantage of making sure that your children will marry Jews and stay in the Jewish fold, and your grandchildren and great-grandchildren will be Jewish, is by making Aliyah. And there are not many things that I can do that can really decide, have ramifications 500 years from now. But the Rivash says that that's what's special about the mitzvah of Eretz Yisrael. When you make Aliyah and move your family tree to its final destination, yeah, I could choose to be religious. My children could choose not to be religious. Everybody has free will. But when I move the family tree to the land of Israel, well, that basically is setting that my family is going to be part of the future eternal Jewish history. Just an example, my mother, she should be well. She's 88 years old, and she has more than 120 children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, and all of them are in Israel. There's one who's still floating around in the world between South America, North America, India, but there's one like that in every family. But if 120 out of 121 are in Israel, well, that is a good way of making sure that your children will stay with the Jewish people. And the final point is tefillah. You got to daven a lot because together with all the 5 points of Jewish education, you could do everything right by the book. And all these approaches, they don't contradict. And adrabah, they embellish themselves. And it's good to find the balance. But need a lot of siyata dishmaya. And we all have to pray to Hashem that he should succeed our way of, with all of our children, that we should be zocheh, that this year should be a year of peace and a year of a geula, that next year we should all be in Eretz Yisrael, by the Beit HaMikdash, le'echol mi'azvachim u'mi'apsachim l'shana haba Yerushalayim. If anybody has any comments or, let's see, how do I get into chat? You can turn on your mics now. Chat. Does anybody know how I can get into chat?
Can you
Here.
just post your sources again? Can you post it so I can download it?
How can I post it? I could go into share screen. Would that be
No,
good?
no, you
Okay.
have to. Yeah.
So it's posted on the Torah in Motion site. I posted
Okay.
it. I sent them already 2 weeks ago. If somehow you can't find it, so just write Torah in Motion and they have it. Okay.
Thank you.
I think
Thank
that
you.
clayot are roasted green wheat seeds, more like candy today. I would be happy to explain at the end. Klayot, we know, are roasted, and Rashi does say that they are green wheat seeds that when you roast them, they are edible. But according to most Ashkenazim, they wouldn't eat them anyway. According to the Taz, the Taz says that peas and green beans are not kitniot, but most Ashkenazim don't eat peas and kitniot. So that's what. But yeah, klayot is roasted things that are treats today. They were treats
Candy.
in those days. Sorry?
Well, in Ashkenaz, the seasons are totally different.
Hmm.
You have the privilege of living here in Eretz Yisrael. When does
Ah,
what's the first grain that ripens? Barley. That's why we bring a korban, right? When
uh,
does the wheat ripen and is harvested? Between Pesach and Shavuot. The wheat
right.
dries out in the field, and then it's easy to harvest it, separate the grains away, and so on. But
Okay.
at Pesach time, the grain, the wheat and the kusmin, but the wheat in particular, which is the main crop, they're almost ripe. They're green and they're almost
Mm,
ripe.
yeah,
People
fair.
in North
Very
America,
nice.
people in North America will know. If you grow, if you go to the store and you buy corn on the cob, it's not really super sweet, but it's tasty, etc. But if you grow corn on the cob in your backyard, the way you cook it is you put the water up to boil. When the water is boiling, that's when you go out to the backyard, take the ear of corn off its separate up and throw it in the pot. What happens then is it's totally sweet. Why?
Yeah, fair.
Because the main material is, as it's growing, is sugar. But as
Hmm.
soon as you harvest it, the sugar polymerizes, that is, it turns to starch. Starch is a whole bunch of sugar molecules holding hands.
And I
Starch,
have to apologize that I don't know. I'm sure there are some people here who are interested in getting the best and sweetest corn and others, but I think we got the idea. And I appreciate and I will remember. That's what you just said. I will remember for my whole life. That's something good to remember. Okay. Another comment was if you don't come back on Saturday, don't come back on Monday. Oh, I remember that from my grandfather's generation. Yeah,
that's
that
where
was
the fair, it's hard to be a Jew. That's where it came from.
yeah.
I don't know whether
That's
there
where
are any.
the Hashkama minyanim also came from.
That's
Okay,
right.
any other comments? Any other comments or questions? The field is open.
My parents said it's hard to be a Jew, but they said it with pride, like we're a
Ah,
special group. And so that did
uh,
not give us the impression of Judaism as being too hard because they were very
uh,
proud. They were very proud of their
that's
efforts. Well, they were
that's
immigrants.
very
So
interesting.
they were immigrants,
Yes,
so they were very proud. And I wish my children, who are all busy doing preparations for Pesach, in another city, which I'm going to, have could listen to your lecture because it was so good. And they're the ones who need to know this about the children and their
so that
grandchildren.
so that's great. So you have a lot of divrei Torah that you can give over to them. Try and give it over before the Pesach, before the Seder.
Or after the babies go to sleep.
Yeah, fair. Yeah, fair.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, any other comments or questions?
Yes,
Okay.
the reason why we keep away
Who's speaking, please?
it was Gabi Keston.
Okay,
Um,
Shalom.
why we keep the matzah away from children so they concentrate. You were saying that they like there's a time for every pleasure, correct?
That's the
So they
Rashbam's
don't grab it
explanation.
and
That's the
Rashbam.
Rashbam's explanation. That's one of the five explanations.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? I always tell Rabbi Kelman that the Torah in Motion community is always very good and I always learn from your comments as well. So thank you for your comment and questions. Any others? Okay. So have a Chag Kasher v'Sameach, have a kosher and happy Pesach. And Bezrat Hashem, we should all see you, Bezrat Hashem, in Yerushalayim, Ir HaKodesh. B'meira v'yameinu. Shalom, shalom.